Okay, I probably should have done this video a long time ago, but we're going to do it right now. This is going to be the top 5 tools you need to be able to build and repair golf clubs. So let's go. Hi everyone, welcome to the Mobile Club Maker, welcome to the shop. I'm AJ, thanks for watching the video today. So yeah, today we are going to do a video that I probably should have done way back, as it's kind of the basis for everything else. But we are going to look at what are the top 5 tools, in my opinion, that you need to be able to build and repair golf clubs with. So these are the top 5, I call it tools, but it's sort of tool/categories in some cases. But these are the top 5 things that you need, I think, in your shop if you want to be able to build and repair golf clubs at a proficient, at a professional level. Okay, this is the very sort of foundation that you need to build your golf club building knowledge. I know some people are going to watch this video and they're going to say, well, you forgot this or you didn't mention that. And I, willingly acknowledge it's only 5. I'm only talking about 5, and these are pretty big, basic ones that I'm going to be talking about that, especially if you're just getting into club building, these are going to be things you want to make sure you have. I'm not going to hit everything. I'm not covering everything. I'm not trying to cover everything. These are just the main ones. Once you have these, then you can go off and start looking at some other more specific tools and things like that. But this is going to be just the big 5. So what's on the list? Okay, tool number 1 in our top 5 is going to be your standard bench-mounted vise. No, it's not very exciting. It's not very colorful. It's not going to get a lot of oohs and ahs from people coming into your shop, but it is incredibly useful, and you're going to find all sorts of applications for it when you're doing club work, be it regripping, be it reshafting, be it custom finish type stuff like wedge stamping, things like that. It has any number of applications. You will pick up, some rubberized shaft clamps or pads that you can use to either hold a shaft in there so you can do regripping, or hold a head in there if you needed to clean out a hosel or bore out a hosel. I also use mine because you can attach other tools into the vise. My shaft extractor, when I'm using my shaft extractor, I put that into the teeth of my vise to hold it there because it's a good solid base. It's also got a anvil style back on it, so if I'm doing wedge stamping or iron stamping, things like that, that is what I'm going to use, just that very strong piece of metal on the back that I can hammer on to do my wedge stamping. Incredibly useful tool, incredibly inexpensive for how useful it is, and again, I think for the number of applications it has in club building, it's an incredibly useful and necessary tool. Okay, number 2 on our list is going to be a ruler. Now, you could go in the direction of something more like a tape measure, that kind of thing, but I really think the best option is going to be something like this, which is a 48-inch aluminum ruler. Again, this is going to be something that you can use in numerous applications when you're building and repairing clubs. Obviously, first off is going to be measuring golf club length. You can take your basic 48-inch ruler and you can measure a golf club for length every bit as accurately as any other method of measuring out there. You're also going to use it whenever you're cutting shafts, be it tipping shafts or be it butt cutting shafts to final length. If you need to take 1 inch off it, you need to take 2 inches off it, you measure it all right there. A lot of different applications. Yes, it's also going to be good if you have maybe a smaller ruler or something more like a caliper. But if we're only talking about one, I'm going to go with a 48-inch aluminum ruler. Okay, tool number 3 is really more of a category than a specific tool, but that's going to be a cutting tool or cutting tools. If you're building golf clubs, if you're repairing golf clubs, you're going to need to be cutting shafts to different butt lengths, to different tip lengths, so you're going to need some sort of cutting tools. You've got a lot of different options out there, but you're going to want something that you can cut through both steel shafts and graphite shafts. So there's a few different options out there. Obviously, you can go with something very simple when it comes to steel shafts, like this. This is just your basic pipe cutting tool you can get at any hardware store. You put the shaft in here, you tighten this down, you turn it around the shaft, and you cut the steel shaft. Very simple, very inexpensive, and pretty quick really for what it is. For graphite, obviously you're not going to want to use something like this because you'll crack the graphite. But a plain old hacksaw with a good quality blade on it is going to be perfectly fine to get you cut through any graphite shaft you may have to cut through. Also, it'll work for any sort of plastic type extensions you may need to work with. Now, if we're moving beyond just manual hand tools, well, then we can look at things like, your basic rotary tool like this Dremel with a cutting blade on it. You can cut both steel and graphite with it. Now, of course, once you move into power tools, you need to be a little more aware of what you're doing to make sure you don't make a mistake. You want to make sure you've got your eye protection in your gloves, things like that. But this is going to speed the process up a little bit more versus the hand pipe cutter or just a plain old hacksaw. Again, moving up from there, you can go to something like this, which is sort of a grinder with a cutting wheel on it. Again, this is going to be even faster than the Dremel. It moves faster. The wheel is spinning faster. It can cut through graphite. It can cut through steel very quickly. But again, you want to make sure you're paying attention to what you're doing because this is definitely a more heavy-duty piece of equipment. From there, if you're really cutting numerous shafts, if you're doing more club work, well, then you can go into something like I use in the shop usually, which is a cutting wheel attached to essentially a bench grinder. And that gives you a very stable platform to cut shafts on because it just sits there and then you move the shaft in and cut the shafts. So I like it. In theory, it's a little bit safer because, the machine itself is stable. It's not moving around. You're just moving the shaft, and it cuts very professionally and cuts very precisely. But again, this is a much more expensive piece of equipment, so it's not something I would say you need to run out and buy right away. But if you get to the point where you're building, over a certain number of golf clubs, it may make sense to look into getting something like that. Okay, number 4 in our top 5 tools you need for golf club repair and building is going to be, again, not so much a specific tool, but a category, and that's going to be some sort of heating tool. If you're doing any sort of reshafting or even doing regripping, some sort of heating tool is a necessity. So the first thing you could look at is something like this, your basic heat gun. These are going to be good options if you're starting out because your likelihood of really messing anything up is going to be pretty minimal. They don't get that hot. We're talking 1,000 degrees, 1,200 degrees maybe for some of the really powerful ones, but you're probably not going to, burn through anything, melt anything, really mess anything up too badly with that unless you completely stop paying attention and just leave it sitting there. So it's a good sort of starter training wheels sort of tool, if you will, when you're talking about removing shafts from heads, things like that. Moving up from a heat gun, you can look at something in a torch, either something like this, a little butane micro torch, or you can go all the way up to something like this, just a regular propane torch. These are both going to be obviously very fast, very efficient ways to heat things up. You're going to want to be a lot more careful with these because you're talking about much higher temperatures. If you're worried about it, the butane, the micro torch, something like that, this is sort of a good in-between because it still gets very hot. It gets to around, say, 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit, but it has a very precise flame and it's still not as hot. So any sort of club repair that you need to do, be it removing a head and a shaft, or if you're just trying to heat up some tape a little bit to make it easier to pull off a shaft when you're regripping, you can still use something like that as long as you're careful. From there, you can go into just a regular sort of propane torch. This you want to be the most careful with because it's got a bigger flame. It's a very hot flame. Again, in this case, we're talking about, say, 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Very hot, so you can use it to remove shafts, things like that, graphite even, but you have to be very aware of what you're doing. You have to be paying attention because, especially if you're trying to do something like save a shaft and pull it out so it could be used again, if you're going to use something like a propane torch, you want to be very aware of moving the heat around constantly and just heating it long enough for you to break that bond to pull that shaft out, because it can very quickly go from being perfectly fine to all of a sudden you fried that shaft and it's no longer any good. You can also very easily, with any sort of torch, put a burn or some sort of heat mark on any sort of painted heads, you know, a driver, a fairway wood, a hybrid, or even some of the finishes that are on some of the irons, different darker finishes, things like that. You want to also be very careful with any sort of open flame heating. But in either case, be it a heat gun, a little micro torch, or a propane torch, they're all going to work. It's just a matter of how hot they get and just sort of a matter of practicing with it so you know how much heat it takes to break down the epoxy or whatever task you're trying to do. All right, last but not least, tool number 5 on our list of top 5 tools you need for repairing and building golf clubs is going to be a power drill. Again, this is another tool, multi-use, multi-purpose. You're going to find you're going to use it all the time when you're doing club work. I use it so often that I have 2 different drills that I usually have on hand, because I'll have one that has some sort of sanding bit, something like this on the end of it, or a cleaning type brush on the end of it that I'll use when I'm reshafting golf clubs to clean out the hosel. I'll also have just a regular drill bit if I need to, you know, clean out the inside of a shaft, or if I need to manipulate the weight a little bit on a certain iron head and I can remove some material using a drill. It's going to be a very useful tool. It's probably a tool, again, you already have, but you'll find all sorts of uses for it when you're going through the process of reshafting a golf club or changing the weight. I'll also use the drill if I have to change the weight and I need to add some little hosel weights or some little shaft tip weights. I'll use those sometimes if the shaft tip weight I have isn't quite right. I can remove some material with a drill and use that and get the right number I'm trying to get. Okay, so there you have it. Those are my personal top 5 tools you're going to want to have for any sort of club building or club repair work that you're going to take on with your golf clubs. Those were, one more time, the vise, the ruler, some sort of cutting tool, some sort of heating tool, and a drill. Again, if you have these 5 tools, you will be able to accomplish most any club repair, club build that you want to do. Is this an exhaustive list? Of course not. These are just sort of the foundation. These are the basics. But if you have these, you will be well on your way. And once you really get used to these and know how many different applications all these tools have, you'll be able to sort of pick and choose after that and sort of fill in the holes that you may have for certain applications that you can't maybe do with just these 5 tools. But again, if I'm picking 5 tools that you want to make sure are in your shop, these are the 5. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please go down below, give it a big thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. And we will see you next time. Thanks.